The year was 1993, a time when the digital age was still in its infancy, and secrets were easier to bury, at least for a while. Tucked away in the heart of Washington, D.C., the Federal Bureau of Investigation hummed with activity. It was a place of duty, honor, and integrity, or so it appeared to the outside world. Behind those marble walls, however, lay a web of personal ambitions, secrets, and scandals. One such scandal would lead to betrayal, murder, and a mystery that still haunts the corridors of justice. Special Agent Mark Renner was the epitome of success. At 42, he had carved out an impressive career at the FBI. Tall, charismatic, and impeccably dressed, Renner had been the lead investigator on several high-profile cases. Known for his sharp intellect and unwavering determination, he was often described as a rising star, destined for the top ranks of the Bureau. But Mark's personal life painted a far less polished picture. To the outside world, Mark's marriage to his wife, Claire, seemed picture perfect. She was a former journalist turned stay-at-home mother, raising their two children in their suburban Virginia home. Behind closed doors, however, their relationship was strained. Mark's long hours at work and constant travel had created a chasm between them. Claire suspected infidelity but lacked proof. Mark, for his part, resented what he saw as her growing disinterest in him. Enter Jennifer Lasky, a 29-year-old secretary who had been working at the FBI for just over a year. Jennifer was everything Claire wasn't: young, vibrant, and eager to please. She often stayed late at the office, assisting Mark with administrative tasks that he claimed no one else could handle. Their late-night work sessions quickly turned into private dinners, and before long, they found themselves entangled in a clandestine affair. Jennifer was not naive. She knew Mark was married, but she was captivated by his charm and the thrill of their forbidden relationship. For Mark, Jennifer was an escape from the monotony of his domestic life. What neither of them realized was that their affair was far from secret. In an environment like the FBI, where suspicion and surveillance were second nature, it was only a matter of time before their illicit relationship drew attention. By mid-1993, whispers about Mark and Jennifer had reached the ears of his colleagues. Some dismissed it as office gossip, but others saw it as a breach of the Bureau's strict code of conduct. Among those who took notice was Special Agent Rick Delaney, a longtime rival of Mark's. Rick had always envied Mark's success and saw this as an opportunity to bring him down. Rick began collecting evidence, piecing together the puzzle of Mark's infidelity. He wasn't doing it out of moral indignation. This was personal. He wanted to tarnish Mark's spotless reputation and possibly claim his coveted position. Rick's methods were both meticulous and underhanded. He planted bugs in Mark's office, monitored his phone calls, and even followed him on his supposed work trips. As Rick's investigation progressed, he uncovered something far more sinister than an affair. Mark wasn't just using his relationship with Jennifer for personal gratification. He was also leaking classified information. The nature of the information wasn't immediately clear, but the implications were catastrophic. If Rick's findings were accurate, Mark's actions could jeopardize national security. Meanwhile, Jennifer began to notice changes in Mark's behavior. He became paranoid, frequently checking his surroundings and questioning her about conversations with coworkers. At first, she chalked it up to stress, but soon she started receiving anonymous phone calls and cryptic messages. Someone was watching her, and she suspected it wasn't just a jealous colleague. One evening, Mark showed up at Jennifer's apartment unannounced, his face pale and his demeanor frantic. He told her that their affair had been exposed and that they were both in danger. When Jennifer pressed for details, Mark hesitated, clearly torn between protecting her and keeping her in the dark. Finally, he admitted that someone within the Bureau was targeting him and that the stakes were higher than she could imagine. Jennifer, terrified and confused, asked if they should go to the authorities. Mark dismissed the idea, insisting that they couldn't trust anyone. Instead, he proposed a plan. They would leave town together and start fresh. Jennifer, blinded by her feelings for Mark, agreed. She began packing her belongings, unaware that she was walking into a trap. At the same time, Rick was preparing to confront Mark with the evidence he had gathered. He knew he had to act quickly. If Mark caught wind of his investigation, he could destroy the evidence or flee. Rick also had a personal stake in this confrontation. He wanted to see the look on Mark's face when his carefully constructed world came crashing down. But Rick wasn't the only one closing in on Mark. Unbeknownst to both men, a shadowy figure had been quietly observing the entire situation. This individual, whose identity would later become a key piece of the puzzle, had their own reasons for wanting Mark silenced. The stage was set for a collision course that would end in bloodshed. The lives of Mark, Jennifer, and everyone connected to them were about to be irrevocably altered. What began as a secret affair was now spiraling into a deadly game of cat and mouse, where trust was a luxury no one could afford. As the clock ticked down, secrets unraveled, alliances shifted, and the true cost of betrayal became horrifyingly clear. But in the shadows of Washington, D.C., where power and ambition often trump morality, one question loomed: who would strike first? Jennifer sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. Mark paced back and forth across her tiny apartment, muttering to himself. The air between them was heavy with tension, but it was his eyes that frightened her the most. Wild, darting from corner to corner, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "We don't have much time," Mark said, his voice sharp and urgent. "Get everything you can carry. We're leaving tonight." Jennifer hesitated, her fear bubbling into questions. "Mark, what's really going on? You're not telling me everything." He stopped mid-step, his jaw tightening. "I told you enough. It's safer if you don't know the rest. Trust me on this, okay?" But Jennifer didn't trust him. Not entirely. She had seen the shifts in his demeanor over the past few weeks, the way he flinched at shadows and snapped at her questions. Something was deeply wrong, and she suspected it went far beyond their exposed affair. Mark suddenly grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm, but not cruel. "Listen to me, Jen. If we stay here, we're dead. Do you understand? Dead." The weight of his words sent a chill down her spine. She nodded reluctantly and zipped up her bag, ignoring the voice in her head screaming for answers. Outside, the night was unusually quiet, the city cloaked in an eerie stillness. Mark led Jennifer to his car, a nondescript sedan he had borrowed from a bureau motor pool under false pretenses. He glanced around nervously before opening the passenger door for her. As they pulled out onto the street, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Unbeknownst to them, they were. Rick Delaney sat parked a block away, his car blending seamlessly into the darkness. His surveillance had been relentless over the past 48 hours, and now he was watching Mark's every move. Rick was no longer just after proof of an affair or even Mark's potential treason. This had become a personal crusade. The moment Mark stepped out of line, Rick would be there to bring him down. But Rick wasn't the only one keeping tabs on Mark and Jennifer. Across the city, in a dimly lit room, an anonymous figure sat behind a computer screen, monitoring encrypted communications. This person was neither FBI nor a scorned colleague. They were something far more dangerous. The information Mark had leaked hadn't simply disappeared. It had found its way into the hands of someone willing to kill to protect it. As Mark drove, he tried to explain their next steps to Jennifer. "We'll head to a safe house. It's remote, off the grid. No one will find us there." Jennifer stared out the window, her reflection in the glass looking as lost as she felt. "And then what? We just disappear? What about your wife? Your kids? What about my life?" Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. "There's no going back now, Jen. I've made mistakes, I know that. But I'll fix this. I'll keep you safe." The more he spoke, the less Jennifer believed him. She had fallen for a man she thought was strong, confident, and in control, but now he seemed like a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. Several miles away, Rick received a text message from an unknown number. "They're on the move. Don't lose them." Rick frowned. He hadn't shared his surveillance with anyone outside his circle. Who could have known? The message unsettled him, but he couldn't afford to waste time on paranoia. He started his engine and followed Mark's car at a safe distance. Mark, unaware of Rick's pursuit, veered off the main road and onto a desolate highway. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow the car whole. Jennifer's anxiety grew with every mile, her imagination conjuring worst-case scenarios. "Mark, she finally said, breaking the silence. What if someone's following us? He glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw clenching. They won't find us. I made sure of it. Jennifer wasn't convinced. She turned in her seat, peering out the back window, but all she could see was the endless stretch of road behind them. Still, the nagging sense of being watched refused to leave her. Meanwhile, Rick's car crept along several hundred yards behind them, his headlights off to avoid detection. He was no amateur. He knew how to tail someone without being seen. But as the minutes passed, he began to feel uneasy. His instincts told him something wasn't right. Suddenly, Mark slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Jennifer yelped in surprise, clutching the dashboard for support. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Mark didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a handgun. Jennifer's eyes widened in terror. "Mark, what the hell?" "Stay in the car," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stepped out into the darkness, scanning the area around them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Mark's paranoia had reached its peak. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound a warning. Rick, still parked a safe distance away, watched through binoculars as Mark surveyed his surroundings. This was his chance. He grabbed his own weapon and prepared to approach, his adrenaline surging. But before Rick could make his move, the faint glow of another vehicle's headlights appeared on the horizon, heading toward Mark and Jennifer's car. Rick froze, his instincts screaming at him to stay hidden. Mark, too, noticed the approaching car. He raised his gun, his hand trembling slightly. Jennifer, still inside the car, crouched low, her heart pounding in her chest. The vehicle slowed as it neared them, eventually stopping a few yards away. The driver's door opened, and a tall, shadowy figure stepped out, their face obscured by the darkness. "Mark Renner," the figure said, their voice cold and measured. "You've made quite a mess." Mark's grip on the gun tightened. "Who the hell are you?" The figure took a step closer, their movements calm and deliberate. "You already know the answer to that." Jennifer watched from the car, her terror mounting. She couldn't hear their words clearly, but the tension between Mark and the stranger was palpable. Rick, still hidden in the shadows, recognized the figure immediately. It was someone he hadn't expected, someone who had no official reason to be involved in this case. His confusion quickly turned to dread. Without warning, the stranger drew a weapon of their own, and the night erupted in gunfire. Jennifer screamed as Mark fired wildly, his shots ricocheting off the stranger's car. The stranger, however, was precise. Mark stumbled backward, clutching his chest as blood blossomed across his shirt. He fell to the ground, his gun slipping from his grasp. Jennifer threw open her door and ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Mark! Mark!" He looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "Run! Jen! Run!" The stranger approached slowly, their weapons still raised. Jennifer wanted to fight, to scream, to do anything, but her body refused to move. And then, as the figure loomed over her, she heard another shot, this one from behind her. She turned just in time to see Rick stepping out of the shadows, his gun smoking. "Drop it!" Rick shouted, his voice commanding. The stranger hesitated, then lowered their weapon, a smirk playing on their lips. "This isn't over," the stranger said before retreating into the car and speeding off into the night. Rick rushed to Jennifer's side, but it was too late for Mark. The rising star of the FBI lay lifeless on the cold asphalt, the web of lies and betrayal he had spun finally catching up to him. Jennifer collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Rick stood over them, his mind racing. He had sought justice, but this wasn't the ending he had anticipated. The silence after the chaos was deafening. Jennifer sat frozen on the asphalt, her tears mingling with the blood pooling around Mark's lifeless body. Rick crouched beside her, his gun still in hand, scanning the darkness for any sign of the mysterious shooter. The figure had vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions and an air of unease. Rick's radio crackled to life, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Delaney, status update. What's going on?" For a moment, he couldn't find the words. What had started as a pursuit of Mark Renner for his indiscretions had turned into something far darker and far more dangerous than Rick had anticipated. "Suspect down," Rick finally muttered into the radio. But there's another player here. Unknown identity, possibly armed and hostile. The voice on the other end replied sharply. Stay put. Backup is en route. Rick didn't have time to wait. He turned to Jennifer, who was still trembling, her face pale and streaked with tears. Jennifer, he said firmly, gripping her shoulder, I need you to focus. Who was that? Do you know them? Jennifer shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I don't know. Mark never told me anything about this. Rick sighed in frustration. He was hiding something big, and now he's dead because of it. Jennifer flinched at his bluntness, but Rick didn't have the luxury of sugarcoating the situation. He grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. You're coming with me. We need to get you somewhere safe before they come back. Jennifer resisted, her voice breaking. Safe? There is no safe, Rick. Don't you get it? Whoever that was, they're after me too. Rick's jaw tightened. He couldn't argue with her logic. Whoever had killed Mark wasn't going to leave loose ends, and Jennifer was now the only loose end left. He led her to his car, constantly checking their surroundings. The road was still eerily quiet, but Rick's instincts told him they weren't alone. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried the threat of an unseen enemy. As they drove back toward the city, Rick grilled Jennifer for details. Think, Jennifer, did Mark ever say anything about leaking information? Anything about selling intel or being blackmailed? Jennifer hesitated. He mentioned something about someone in the bureau being out to get him. I thought he was just paranoid, but now, I don't know. He didn't trust anyone, not even his own team. Rick's mind raced. Mark's paranoia, the affair, the leaks. It all pointed to something much larger than a simple case of infidelity. He knew he needed answers fast, and he knew just the place to start looking. He drove them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a temporary safe house he had used before. It wasn't ideal, but it would buy them time. Once inside, he secured the doors and handed Jennifer a bottle of water. Stay here, he ordered. Don't open the door for anyone except me. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. To finish what Mark started, Rick said grimly. He left Jennifer behind, locking the warehouse and driving straight to FBI headquarters. Rick knew the risks of going back, especially after disobeying protocol, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the key to unraveling the mystery lay in Mark's office. Slipping inside under the cover of night, Rick bypassed the minimal security with his badge. Mark's office had been sealed off earlier that day, but Rick had no intention of letting red tape stop him. He broke the seal and stepped inside, flipping on the light. The office was pristine, almost too perfect. Mark had been meticulous, but Rick knew every man left breadcrumbs. He started rifling through drawers, scanning files, and examining Mark's personal belongings. It didn't take long for him to find something odd, a flash drive taped to the underside of Mark's desk. Rick pulled it free, his heart pounding. He slipped it into his pocket and continued searching, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway froze him. Rick extinguished the light and crouched behind the desk, his gun drawn. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped outside the door. The knob turned slowly. Rick held his breath as the door creaked open. A shadowy figure stepped inside, their movements cautious and deliberate. Before the intruder could react, Rick sprang up, his weapon trained on them. Hands up! The figure complied, raising their hands. As the light from the hallway illuminated their face, Rick's stomach dropped. It was someone he knew well, a senior FBI official, someone who had no business being there. Rick, the man said calmly, a faint smirk on his lips. You're in over your head. Rick's finger tightened on the trigger. Start talking. Why was Mark killed? What's on this drive? The man chuckled. You think you're the hero in this story? Mark was a traitor. He got what he deserved. Traitor? Rick snapped. What are you covering up? The man's smirk disappeared. You don't understand. This is bigger than Mark, bigger than you, bigger than all of us. Walk away, Rick. Take the girl and disappear. That's the only way you survive this. Rick's mind raced. The implications were staggering. He knew corruption existed, even in the Bureau, but this was something else entirely. You're lying, Rick said, his voice firm. The man shook his head. Think what you want, but if you dig any deeper, you'll end up like Mark. Before Rick could respond, the man lunged at him, grabbing for the gun. They struggled, the confined space amplifying the chaos. A single shot rang out, and the man collapsed to the floor, blood spreading beneath him. Rick stared at the body, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He grabbed the flash drive and fled the scene, knowing he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Back at the warehouse, Jennifer was waiting anxiously when Rick returned, his face pale and his hands trembling. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more, so please subscribe and hit the bell icon.